Every single one of us is a leader and could be a leader.
It started with a local coalition in our county.
Strategies you know, but stories you don't.
Data is the currency of prevention.
We want to reduce the negative and we want to promote the positive.
Collaboration is the only way to move the prevention needle.
About connecting the research with the practitioner.
Put something out there that was kind of off the wall and create a community of prevention.
It's a passion, it's a real love to try to help make our world a little bit better, a little bit happier, small pieces at a time.
This is the Mid-America PTTC podcast, where we believe prevention is better together, and together we are stronger. I'm your host, Dave Clausen, and I'm the director of the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center. This is episode 37, and today we're doing things just a little different. Alicia Ozenberger, the deputy director of our parent organization, ACT Missouri, is hosting some amazing Facebook Live videos that are quick bites of great information and interviews. We've repackaged them and are bringing them to you right here on this podcast. In today's episode, Alicia and Chris Dzurick discuss how a youth-led campaign is often more impactful when the intended audience is in fact youth. Chris shares the Missouri Youth Ambassador's latest campaign, Don't Take the Vape Bait. But before we get into the content, we'd like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And a quick note, although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today I have with me, you might notice this face if you've watched us before. Chris has been a guest before, so welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Chris has been our youth ambassador coordinator for many years now, and actually started out as a youth ambassador and works with youth in his full-time job as well, youth-led activities, campaigns, things like that. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about youth-led prevention campaigns. So Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the youth ambassadors developed last year?
Certainly. So every year with our Youth Ambassador program, we work to develop some sort of campaign that highlights a need in the community. And we don't go into the Youth Ambassador program necessarily knowing what that's going to be. We try to drive it to be student-led. So we listen to their stories, we listen to their concerns about what they're seeing across the state within their own schools or what's happening after school in their community. And we try to address our focus of our campaign around that. We find value in the student buy-in aspect. When it's their campaign, it's their problem that they're seeing. The success rate that we have with them actually going through and completing the steps of a project are considerably greater. So this past year, the 2019-20 school year, we wanted to address e-cigarettes and vaping. That was the major concern of the youth ambassadors that we had at the time. And they wanted to try to focus those efforts on a younger generation of students rather than doing a prevention campaign that was addressed at the 9-12 high school level. They wanted to focus on some early prevention. So we set out with kind of four main objectives for the campaign. The first was that we did want it to be age appropriate, not only in the content, but in the delivery mechanism that we had. So the youth ambassadors ended up developing a comic strip that could be published online or could be printed out in schools because they wanted it to really target that like 4th through 6th grade age group. We also wanted to make sure that we had evidence-based data. So we had the youth ambassadors doing research, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't just throwing a statistic on something. So we had them researching actual outcomes that would have been related to that 4th through 6th grade kind of age demographic and where those students might want to be in the coming years and what consequences there might be for vaping. We also wanted it to be series-based. So if the youth ambassadors were to finish it or wanted to continue it, we wanted it to be something that could either live on through the future years of the youth ambassador program or could be picked up by these students and continued through ACT Missouri. And then finally, they insisted that we had to have a catchphrase. It had to be memorable. They wanted it to be something that was short and sweet and succinct, but was still delivering that message. So that's kind of what we worked on over the past year.
And what are some of the questions, if you will? Because I know you have kind of detailed worksheets and a series of questions, but just for our audience, what are some of the questions that you start asking the youth when you start trying to get them to pull out a substance that is affecting their school or their community?
Mm-hmm. So we do that both quantitatively and qualitatively. So we have a survey that we use that just kind of gauges some base level knowledge for these youth ambassadors as to their understanding of substance abuse and risky behavior. So we use that as a metric where we can kind of see where there might be a lack of understanding even within our own students that are in these leadership roles. And then qualitatively, we have discussion and activities that we do at our initial training that help to break out some of that information. We don't necessarily say, what is happening in your community, and then sit and wait in silence, around a table. What we do are these interactive activities where they're asking questions, or they're saying, but in my school I heard, or, well, it's a little different where I live. So we want to get it out in a much more natural way than basically feeding them a list of questions that they want to address. So everything is done interactively. And then as we continue our training, even beyond in person, we continue to address those concerns and work to develop this project along the way.
Great. And you touched on it just a little bit, but what's the importance of these prevention campaigns being youth-led, youth-driven, and developed by the youth?
Yeah, so you are always going to find that a youth-created message that is being delivered directly to youth is always going to be, I don't want to use the word better, but it's always going to be received differently when you have those student-developed campaigns. So while many of us in the field are our own subject matter experts in many things, when it comes to prevention and risky behavior and things, we want to make sure that the students are still driving that message themselves. They are the boots on the ground. As much as we know what's happening, they're living and seeing what's happening. So we always try to focus that on the students designing it, and then a role like myself leading the program would advise them and help kind of finalize those delivery mechanisms and things. But it ultimately comes down to the students. If they don't have the buy-in and they don't address what's really happening out in the community, the campaign's not going to be as successful as it should be.
Absolutely. That's great. Okay, so if you don't mind, you want to show us the end product?
Certainly. And this is also available online for anybody on our ACT Missouri website. But our students developed this comic strip, which is 8 different frames of a comic strip that was focused on what they call dark vapor. Dark vapor is the enemy, or vaping or e-cigarettes, just turned into a kind of humanoid aspect. So the youth ambassadors used Canva, which is an online tool that is free, and there's also a subscription version, which is free for nonprofits. So anybody interested would be able to recreate or develop something similar on their own, and they're able to work collaboratively. So they could work even when we weren't in a focused meeting, because it was all online, which turned out to serve our benefit when schools closed in March. So we were able to still finish the project successfully. And then we could meet up online, share screen, and still interact and work collaboratively. So they created Anti-Vaping Man, who is their hero. Dark Vapor is their enemy. And the story basically addresses a student who is being exposed to e-cigarettes by a friend. So there's a peer pressure element that they really wanted to highlight. So we initiate with that before Anti-Vaping Man actually goes in to fight the effects of vaping, essentially. So Anti-Vaping Man hops into the body a little bit, I guess, magic school bus style here, to fight away dark vapor throughout the body. So we address the different effects, not all of them, but we address those effects that the students found within their research. So we talked about lungs, and then you'll note here, I mentioned earlier how important it is to connect it back to that age demographic. So they spun this one on, it makes things like playing sports harder, being involved in activities harder because it's affecting your lungs. So we tried to relate a consequence directly to something that the students would understand, rather than just saying it'll make breathing harder. So it was really important to address it in that manner. Afterwards, headed to the heart, where we talked about blood flow restrictions. Once again, jumping into kind of that physical fitness aspect, knowing that that will be something that students may be interested in football or basketball or playing sports in high school or college might start to recognize that their effects of what they do at a young age will continue on and could certainly affect them in the future. Then talked about the immune system being sick longer or being sick worse. Which was important to highlight, being out of school, missing activities, maybe missing things like a prom or something. So really showing, again, that negative consequence that went along there. And then we ended with the brain, talking about how, of course, the effects of e-cigarettes and vaping on how you register joy and emotion. So really wanted to highlight that even if you don't necessarily see the physical effects of maybe not being able to breathe or being sick, that there are chemical effects as well. But of course, needing to somehow convert that to making students recognize that joy being the easiest thing, being sad or struggling with your mental health affecting them. And then, of course, just a quick conclusion to not take the vape bait, which was their tagline for this. So focusing, again, as one of our objectives, creating an easy, memorable tagline, a character that would be understood kind of that 4th through 6th grade age demographic.
Yeah, that's great. This is one of my favorite projects, I think, that they've worked on over the years. And it was so great to see them come together collaboratively and get it done. That's really cool.
Yeah, and we definitely, I think one of the things that I most enjoyed about working with this group is even when schools did close and the school year changed and where we normally would have been able to come together and do some of these activities still, they didn't just say, oh, well, it's over, no big deal. We were still able to get on calls, still able to connect. And while we didn't probably meet as much as we would have wanted to wrap up our school year in the campaign, they still finished the project in its entirety. And it can live on based off of the success that we see with it.
Yeah, that's great. And for those of you who want to see it again, I will put the link in the chat box when we are done. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And thanks for presenting that for me. I appreciate it.
Of course, I always love to be a part of this and wish everybody the best on their own youth campaigns.
That concludes this episode. Thank you all for not only taking time to listen, but your continued work to make our region safe, healthy, and drug-free. If you'd like to know what training we have coming up, check out our website at pttcnetwork.org. And remember, prevention is better together, and together we are stronger.